This video is going to be for the October 21st class and is not necessarily a super new tool in Arc Pro, but one that's got a lot of development over the last couple years, and I think it's important time to really sort of devote a video to it. It's very related to spatial joins and intersects, so definitely would suggest you can watch this one, but having the sort of background of a spatial join and an intersect may help you understand this more, because this tool is almost effectively like stringing together combinations of intersects, spatial joins, and joins behind the scenes to produce some extremely useful outputs while summarizing data. So the tool here, right, I said, is sort of summarize within. It's kind of one of the top ones that sits right between buffer and spatial join up on the analytic toolbar. And it's really, again, an outstanding tool that has a ton of applications. A lot of output comes from it, that requires a bit of interpretation. So I'm going to try to slowly, patiently walk through how to interpret the outputs, and hopefully you'll come to the same conclusions I have, that it's just an outstanding tool that should be kind of one of the top in your toolkit when you are trying to summarize some piece of information within a polygonal area. So that's really kind of a key element of this is, in order for this to work, right, we did some spatial join examples in the spatial join video that didn't need polygons, right? You could sort of summarize the point that was closest, or you could summarize all the points that were within a certain distance of another one. But summarize within definitely is going to need a polygonal boundary to do the summaries. And what we're going to use here is sort of high school catchment areas in Philadelphia. So it's a relatively sort of simple one, just a data set that's effectively going to tell you if you live here, this would be sort of the public high school that you'd go to, some basic names with the ID, the short ID, so on and so forth. And we're going to summarize two things. We're first going to summarize point data, show sort of a common example here where you might take the polygons and summarize all the points that are within them. This is a sort of quicker and probably deeper way of doing what we've accomplished with selections. Remember, we could easily sort of select any polygon we wanted. We could come to select by location. We could say, hey, I want to select the crimes that intersect the catchment area. And because my thing is selected, right, it's only going to do the ones that are in here. And then I could open crimes, take a look at its attribute table, let it do its thing, look around, and, I could see that I've got 2,088 effective crimes that are there, right? And if I had some other information like, if this were home sale prices and I had like, home sale value or whatnot, I could right click on something and do sort of a statistic. This is like the hour of the day here. It's not going to give a great statistic. If I had mode, it'd be better. But I could do that and it would sort of summarize that field for me if I needed to. So we're used to doing it, right, with selections. That's sort of a common way that we do this. You could also do it with a spatial join, right? In spatial join, if you sort of know the mechanics of it, would effectively bring back for each of these the sort of summary, the count, join count of the crimes, as well as sort of any fields that you want to summarize. But what we're going to do it with is the summarize tool. And so we're going to open summarize within, and we're going to start here with the crimes, interpret what that gives us. I'm using crimes as my sort of proxy now, but this would be relevant for really any sort of piece of point data, right? So imagine each of these were home sale prices or businesses or sort of something else. Effectively, I'm trying to take for each of the boundaries here, I'm trying to understand and calculate the number of crimes that are within, and then do some other stuff. And that's what's really going to be great about this tool. Spoiler alert, we haven't filled it in yet, but it's this stuff down here at the bottom. Some of it that's going to disappear because I'm using points, like the shape unit, but that's going to come back on the second of these two videos that's linked. where I'm going to sort of summarize a polygon within a polygon. But regardless of whether I'm summarizing a polygon or points, these things on the bottom, the group field down to the grouped table, are really what sets summarize within and its sort of cousin tool summarize nearby apart as being outstanding tools for quick descriptive statistics across a number of large boundaries. So here's how it works. Not dissimilar from spatial join. The first thing it's always going to want is like a polygon where you're doing the summary, right? So an input polygon effectively means that. What do you want to come back? Well, I want the catchment areas to come back, and I want those catchment areas to tell me some stuff about the crimes that are within their boundaries. So I'll come here for the catchment area. So therefore, the summary features are going to be the crimes, no theft. So again, I want to take the catchment area and I want to summarize the crimes that are within them. This would be sort of the output. You save it with whatever you want. We're not going to sort of save it right now because sometimes this tool takes a second. So I've already pre-loaded the sort of data here that we'll look at, the summarize points output, and I'll take a look at it. But if you're following along with this video, you would sort of output the feature class, name it what you want, and look at it. This part here, the summary fields, is definitely going to stand out, I think, a little bit more on the second part of this video. This would be, if you remember when we did a spatial join, right, you would look at a field map and you would right-click the fields, and then you would do a merge rule like sum or mean or median or max. That's the same thing here, right? We don't have any meaningful quantitative fields to summarize because in this instance, each point simply represents a crime. And there's not really sort of a numerical value that would make sense to do, right? You got like the month, if the statistic gave me the ability to do mode, which it doesn't, a most common thing, I could do month, or I could do day of the week, and that would at least maybe give me sort of some element of like when in each area, the day of the week or the month, crimes happen most common. But none of these, right, sum, mean, minimum, maximum, are going to mean anything for this data. So this is just all about knowing your information, right? If maybe these weren't crimes, but these were home sales, and you had a field that said like cost or price, or square footage, hell yeah, you could sort of summarize it up and that would be sort of great. But right now, regardless of whether we load something here, it's always going to give us a count, which is really the main thing we're going to want here, right? The count of the number of crimes. But where this tool is awesome, and where, previously, before this tool got sort of the build out that it's had over the last sort of 4 or 5 years or so, you might have to do a combination of, a spatial join the other direction, right? Crimes being the target and then catchment area, and then do a sort of summarize by type. We can right now not only get the total number of crimes for each, but do a little bit of analytics that actually then breaks it down by the type. So we could see how many crimes overall, and we could see how many crimes of each individual type, and we could see which kind of crime happens most or which kind of happens least, and sort of what relative percent of all the crimes there is. And that all starts here with the group field. So the group field is always going to link up to whatever your summary features are. It's going to look at each of those summary fields and say, hey, is there a categorical field, something that codes the data into a series of categories that we can dissolve down, that you want me to spit the output back to you and break it down by those categories? And in this instance, we do with type, right? And the moment we do it, 3 really cool and critical things are going to come up. We're going to select these 2, and then you would give this a name. You could say like crime type summary. Notice I've already sort of done the output, so we'll look at it together. And this is going to do 2 things. It's going to do 3 things, but it's all going to emerge from this table. This table, what it will eventually show us, and we'll look in a second, is it's going to break down each of these 21 or so catchment areas. I have to make sure that's the right number. 21 catchment areas. It's going to take each of the individual crime summaries within them, and it'll tell us like for catchment area, you know, object ID 1, right, or sort of whatever, you know, there were this many. For object ID 2, there were that many, and sort of so on and so forth. And we'll ultimately be able to see for the Bartram's High School one, you know, or if we come down to sort of the Strawberry Mansion one here, we're going to be able to actually see how many individual crimes of assaults or of burglaries or of what are sort of associated with each. And once it has that detailed information, what's really cool is it's going to push that back into the output table. So we're going to see, like, we can look at each crime type individually, and we'll show that in a second, but it'll actually append to the shapefile that comes back to me which crime happens most and which crime happens least in each catchment area, as well as sort of their relative percentage. So come in and hit run. It'll do its thing. And what you're going to get is an output that is, and I'll get rid of my catchment area here. You'll get two, right? The sort of crime type summary, and you'll ultimately get a thing that looks the same, right? Looks like catchment area. But when I open it and scroll over, it's going to appear mostly the same. It's going to have a really critical object ID as sort of the first field, so let's sort of keep an eye on that because that's going to come in handy in a bit. And if I scroll over past shape area, right, which was the last original field, I'll start to see the points that matter, right? So the one that's most important, count of points, right? That's just telling us how many points we found. So there's your sort of basic answer if you want to be able to say in the Bartram's high school area, we had 2,847 points. But where this tool is awesome is look at these four together. It's actually going to tell you for each one which crime it found the most of, which it found the least of, and the relative percentages of those. And all that comes from here, the crime type summary. So if you open the crime type summary and you find this join ID, right, 1, it's going to link you back to it here, join ID 1. So that's this area. So if I were to select all the ones that are 1, I can see that there were 188 aggravated assaults, and that's about 6.6%. There were 612 residential burglaries, that's 21.4%. And look at that, 21.4%. That's how it knew that the majority crime that occurred in this catchment area, which is Bartram's, was a burglary. And the minority one was homicide gross negligence. Well, there it is, right? Homicide gross negligence just has 1. It'll default to the first thing it finds when there's a tie. But again, what's cool is I can easily answer to anybody how many of each individual crime type happened. That's what the table helps me with. And then I can see that back in the data. So that's awesome, right? You used to have to do a couple of different steps to get this, but this gives you a quick and clean output, right? You get the total count. You can summarize a field, right, with sum, mean, max, standard deviation, which we'll do in the next example. And you get this idea of breaking down by a grouping of something that exists within. So what a really cool, quick way to get a ton of summary-based information at your fingertips. Now, I'm going to pause this video and open the next one so it doesn't go too long. But what we did in the first one, right, is we took catchment area, polygons, which was where we were going to do our counting, and we counted and summarized the crimes. But what if instead we actually did another polygon, right? That's what we're going to do here. What if we took the catchment areas and we tried to summarize stuff about these polygons below them? And I'm going to close this video, right, the same way I'll open the next one. The more you start to zoom in on this, this perfect encapsulates right here the challenge. This neighborhood right here, which is, I got the catchment area. I wanted it to get the neighborhood below it. This neighborhood right here is Brewery Town, right? It's got 9,291 people. As many people owned there. This is older data for those of you following along. This is sort of how big it is, 0.4 square miles. but you can see visually it's cut in half by these two different catchment areas. So what do we do in that situation, right? If we wanted to summarize, where does Brewery Town's values go? And that's the other beautiful application of summarize within that we're going to talk about in the next video.